While in ideal world, we would like to buy every watch we like, in real life, we are limited with our choices. And while considering two watches, what logically would make one option better than the other is the function. In real life, that's not always the case. In our horological lives, and especially in the higher-end watchmaking, it's amazing that while we do want to have professional functions in the watches, they many times become a nice-to-have attribute, and not as such the only specification that we seek when choosing a luxury watch. In our watch collecting journey, the attributes that many times drive the decision for watches are comfort, aesthetics, pleasure, prestige, and wearability. It's interesting that although these are the aspects that as a watch enthusiast help us determine what we prefer, the information that casts light on these attributes is something that is either not stated on manufacturer's website or is something you simply won't know unless you try the watch in real life. The attributes of weight, watch minimum span, its horizontal flare beyond the stated size, the contour to wrist, or even the specification of the clasp are sometimes simply unknown, and maybe some more X factors that you can only feel and experience when you put the watch on the wrist or see it in real life. Tudor Black Bay 58 and GMT Pepsi are although completely different watches in terms of their functionality, with Black Bay being a diving watch with unidirectional bezel and 200 meters of water resistance, and then Pepsi being a professional GMT model having bidirectional bezel, date function, and also 200 meters of water resistance. When you consider their wearability and aesthetics, there are more differences than just the size difference of 2mm. Starting off with obvious differences, when you put them side by side, you can see that despite a smaller size of 39mm, Black Bay 58 comes with much bigger hour markers than GMT that comes in 41mm case size. The size is almost as big as double on 58 as compared to GMT. The dial hands also complement the hour markers, and they are much larger in 58 as compared to ones on GMT. You can also see the difference from the amount of luminous material filled in the hour and minute hand, leaving the hands much wider in Black Bay 58. Another obvious difference between these watches is the color tone used in the dial components, and you can see that 58 comes with gilt tone, and accordingly we have gilt colored text, dial hands and hour markers, as opposed to GMT where the dial has white text and hour markers and dial hands have silver shade to them. Tudor don't specify if the hour markers and dial hands are of white gold, and in the absence of manufacturer claim, I will take the worst case scenario that these are made of stainless steel. Both watches come with aluminum bezel and numerals printed on them. None of the bezels are lumed, but 58 has lumed pip, and we will discuss it further in the lume shot later in the video. Both bezels being made of aluminum also means that they will fade in color gradually over time, which can be a negative or a positive subject to your personal taste or preference. Aluminum bezel also means that upon a hit or bang, they will get a ding or dent, as opposed to ceramic bezels in watches that remain virtually scratchless. Speaking of the differences in size measured at the outer extremity of bezel, Black Bay is 38.94mm in size, whereas on Pepsi, this size returns the reading of 40.87mm. So both of these watches have watch faces true to their marketed sizes. To show the size of dial, I measured the size of crystal on top on both. 58 has crystal size of 30.69mm, as opposed to GMT, where the crystal size returned the reading of 31.86mm. What's interesting is that both of these crystals, or let's say the dials, are slightly bigger than what you see on Rolex Submariner 41mm. Although Black Bay 58 here is technically a 2mm smaller watch than the Sub. The lug-to-lug height is another area of interest, and measured on Black Bay 58, the lug-to-lug height is 47.65 mm as compared to lug height on GMT, which is considerably larger and measured at 50.04 mm. This is interesting because where Black Bay 58 itself has a much taller lug-to-lug, the GMT Pepsi is even more substantial. To put it into another perspective, the lug-to-lug on this Pepsi is even larger than what you get on Rolex Explorer 2, which is a 42 mm watch. It is in fact even comparable to 43 mm Rolex Sea Dweller, although this Tudor GMT is technically only a 41 mm watch. Both watches come with domed crystals on top, so expect to see reflections from the crystal while wearing them. The case thickness is another area where these watches differ considerably. Black Bay 58 is a much thinner watch, and on my caliber, it came out at 11.98 mm compared to GMT, which returned the thickness reading of 14.66 mm. This is a substantial difference in case thickness, and you can feel it even when these watches are not side by side. All the differences in sizes also reflect the same in terms of weight. Adjusted to 6.5 inches wrist, Black Bay 58 is only 131 grams in weight, and adjusted to same bracelet length, the GMT is significantly heavier and returns the reading of 174 grams. This is about 25% heavier, and not that you feel the size on the wrist, you do feel the extra weight and heftiness while wearing it. For reference, Rolex Submariner 41 adjusted to same bracelet length is 148 grams. The bracelet width at the case on 58 is 20 mm as opposed to Tudor GMT, which has much wider bracelet at 22 mm at the lugs. The 2 mm wider bracelet does add up additional heft and chunkiness on Pepsi, which further complement its overall bigger case size better. At the clasp, the size difference is maintained, and we have 17.95 mm width on 58 as opposed to GMT, which is 19.83 mm at the clasp. One similarity you may notice is that both of these bracelets have step tapering as opposed to gradual tapering as we typically see in watches. Putting the watches in the dark, we have amazing lume on both of them, and this lume shot also confirms how bigger the hour markers and wider the hands are on 58. Another interesting difference is that 58 comes with greener lume, whereas on the GMT, although the lume is not blue like Rolex GMT, it is also not green like Black Bay 58. True to being a diving watch, there's a lume pip on 58 to allow time reading in the dark, whereas GMT has no lume in the bezel. I left the watches in the dark for another 10 minutes, and both of them maintain the lume brightness great, and as such, this is a tie. With GMT, we naturally have bidirectional bezel, meaning you can turn the bezel on either side to read the second time zone. The bezel sound on GMT is crisp as well, but nothing like Black Bay 58, which being a diver watch naturally has a more crispier sound, and of course only a unidirectional bezel on offer. On the wrist, the 58 naturally wears smaller relatively, but the lug-to-lug height of over 47.5 mm means that it's actually also not a very small watch, and you will need a wristband of over 48 mm to be able to wear it. The thickness of under 12 mm works really well with smaller size on 58, and it can easily be slipped under the cuff and go unnoticed due to its understated size. GMT, on the other hand, is a relatively bigger watch, and although it is a 41 mm watch on the specs, I personally think that it wears and looks as large as a 43 mm watch, and that is primarily because of its lug-to-lug of over 50 mm, and then the thickness of case close to 15 mm, which adds a lot more substance to the watch on the wrist. You will need a minimum of 52 mm wristband to be able to wear it comfortably. My wrist size is 6.5 inches and wristband is 55 mm, so I can wear either of them without any problems. Tudor Black Bay 58 and GMT are two completely different watches that not only offer different functionalities But also, if you wear your watches for aesthetics, they both offer different experience on the wrist. If you prefer relatively smaller watch and then a dive watch looks as opposed to GMT looks with fourth hand in the dial, prefer thinner watch with simpler dial that can also slip under the cuff and is a more understated watch with vintage vibe, Black Bay 58 has you served better. But if you prefer a more substantial watch on the wrist that does not only fill the wrist horizontally and vertically but is also chunkier due to its thicker case, has a GMT function and is a little louder of the two with Pepsi and colored bezel, then GMT is easily your only option here. If size is of no object to you, then there are many similarities between the two too. Aluminum bezel, circular hour markers with snowflake hands, matte textured dial, and of course, a Tudor vibe.